Suscríbete y entérate de las últimas noticias de El Tiempo. Estás viendo El Tiempo en vivo.
I was driving for 20 hours without possibility to sleep, to rest, and also we all had to be very cheerful and nice and calm. We had to be even calm when we saw the explosions somewhere at the horizon, or saw the planes above us, and we didn't know there were Ukrainian planes or Russian planes. Because there was a child in the car and nobody wanted to traumatize the child.
Kateryna Babkina es la escritora ucraniana que vino a Colombia a ser la oradora central de los premios Simón Bolívar y nos hace el favor de estar aquí con El Tiempo para hablar de periodismo, para hablar de literatura, pero sobre todo para hablar de la situación en Ucrania. First of all, what is the reason to be here in Colombia?
Thank you very much for talking to me. So I'm here to have a honorable speech to the community of Simón Bolívar Journalism Prize and to inspire the journalists and the future winners too, and to celebrate this great event.
Let's start with the poetry. When did you start to engage in poetry, and have you read any Latin American poet?
I was writing poetry always, literally since the time I was able to speak. I was figuring out some short poems, like nursery rhymes, and I was also telling the stories and fairy tales. And I was sure this is something that everyone can do. This is like the normal ability of human being. However, when I started school, everybody started paying a lot of attention to this. So I realized this is some kind of a superpower. And since that, I figured out that I can do it, and I love it. I love doing it. So there is an interest in singing about Latin American poetry, which is very developed. I have a couple of friends who visited the poetry festival in Medellin, and they were so inspired by the number of people involved into this. But also yesterday, I had my chance to walk a little bit around the city, different parts of it, not only touristic Candelaria, but some other parts. And as it was a holiday yesterday, a lot of people were out, and here and there I saw young people, obviously people playing music, showing some tricks, but also here and there I saw some young people declaiming poetry on the streets with a microphone, and a lot of people listening to them. This is something I can hardly imagine to happen, let's say, in Ukraine or in London. So I was fascinated by them. I was listening to one of the guys, and I put the Google Translate on, so I was trying to follow. I don't speak Spanish, unfortunately, but I was trying to follow, and I can say for sure this was poetry, and this was beautiful poetry. So I'm very fascinated by the poetical stage here, but however, I prefer to read poetry in the first language. Translations are tricky. There are a lot of good translations, of Cesar Valleja, of some other poets from here, but I focus rather on poetry that is written in the languages that I can understand, which is Ukrainian, Polish, and English, and basic French. That's it.
Let's talk about the situation in Ukraine. You wrote in one of your poems that even the smallest stone has turned into a weapon to defend its own on its work. Do your poems and you, as a writer, as a poet, have turned into a weapon?
Yes, definitely. Every Ukrainian has had so far. It's probably first case in the world's history when the army is financed by people. We have a huge volunteer movement that by now operates the billions of dollars, literally. People donate and buy weapons, they buy planes, they buy drones, they finance the constructional factories. They're trying to make their own war drones and stuff like that, and obviously all the paramedical things. This is all held on fundraising, on private donation, even the smallest donation of people. But also I'm able to speak about that to the foreign audience, and that was also one of the main reasons why I accepted gladly the invitation to come here, not only to celebrate this great and important prize in independent journalism, but also and to support people who are into this professional high standard journalism, but also to be able to speak about Ukraine to the people who are really far and are existing in a different context, so they might not know enough and not understand enough what is going on there. However, the Russian propaganda is very strong all over the world, so we have to do a lot of efforts to be able to contradict it.
Right. I heard that your last name, Babkina, is a Russian name, and you have some Russian roots. How do you deal? No?
No. The saying is, it is my surname. So Babkina sounds like the classical Russian ending. However, like this is something you will probably understand, for the colonialism has been a big deal here as well. So the Ukraine was colonized by Russian Emperor and later Soviet Union for 400 years, and there were like over 200 laws and prohibition of Ukrainian language. Ukrainians were in different part of time forbidden to go to universities, to occupy different professions or positions whatsoever. So it was not easy they made people to turn into claiming they are this title nation. The Russians, they were putting a lot of efforts to turn everyone into Russians, but Russians still were superior. So the family name of my grandfather's parents were Babko, which is classical Ukrainian ending for the Lapko, Tsapko, Hrivko, Brovko, Drovko, Durko. Those are all would be Ukrainian surnames. And when their children were born, and it's important to say that that was some kind of the time of Ukrainization of Soviet Union. They would grant the right to be Ukrainians, to speak Ukrainian language, to be this Ukrainian minority, which is great bullshit that Ukrainians living in Ukraine during the Soviet time were considered to be the minority in their own land, which is already super crazy. But even in the time when they were supporting people to be Ukrainians, my grandparents considered that the children gonna have better future and better life if they would have the Russian surname. So being Babko themselves, they would sign up their children to be Babkini in order to sound more like belonging to this pan-Russian thing. That's the trick. So my grandfather's surname was Babkin, and then the female version is Babkina. However, the original family name was Babko.
I heard that your ancestors defend the right to speak Russian.
Yes, my grandfather's family, because Ukraine was Russified heavily, literally by weapon and force and blood, for 400 years. So after this, obviously, a lot of people, to stay safer, became Russian-speaking. And then my grandparents were so brainwashed that they would consider the Soviet Union to be the great and effective construct, and they would obviously defend everything what was Soviet and Russian so far. So yeah, they were against the independent Ukraine, and I do remember those events. Where I was 5 years old, I remember those fights at home. The only person to support the Ukrainian independence was my aunt. It's tricky because my grandparents lived almost all their life in Western Ukraine, which is more European-oriented part of it, less Russified. But ethnically, they come from different parts of Ukraine, central and eastern one, but they are still Ukrainians. However, they would consider themselves, during all these pan-Russian ideas and propaganda, they would consider themselves as Russian people. And I was 5, and I was thinking okay, my grandfather was born in Ukraine. Grandmother was born in Ukraine. How come they become Russians? Interesting, And yeah, I remember and my mom and my aunt, their children, they were both born in Western Ukraine and grew up there. never ever spent more than a week on holidays in Moscow, never ever spent time in Russia. Still, my mother would claim she was Russian. However, my aunt would say, come on people, look where we are living, what's going on, so let's let it be, let this country exist. So she was probably like the only like realistic thinking person in that family. And I guess it was on the second place in Soviet Union, like on the first place was military industria. So they were preparing to be weaponized and to defend, as they say, but in reality to aggress different like governments and countries and participate in the conflicts. And the second thing that state was paying effort to was the propaganda. So obviously people were brainwashed because they made it simply, if you don't like something, you go to Siberia or get killed somewhere, like that was it. You always had a choice, they say.
Yeah, absolutely. You were awarded in 2021 for your book, My Grandfather Danced the Best. Is it a real story? Your grandfather danced the best?
Yeah, he did dance. He did dance, and he also did the domestic violence. And he also was heavily traumatized at the Second World War, both physically and psychologically, so that was break him a lot. But at the same time, he was like loving and nice grandfather. He taught me to play chess, he taught me to ski, to skate, to whatever grandfathers do with their grandchildren. And that's a story. This book is the story of 5 families, different families. 2 of them are Jewish families. One is like pro-Soviet family from Eastern Ukraine, and the other 2 are just like regular Ukrainian families with a very different background. And so 5 kids meet each other at the first day at school, at the first year of independent Ukraine. And they become friends. But then in every story, I would discover the history of their families like 100 years back. So in past, during Holodomor, like the artificial famine made by Stalin to like basically to erase Ukrainian nation from the land because he managed to kill like over 6 million people in just 1 year. During the like repressions of late 30s, during the arrests of Ukrainian like writers and intelligence and theater makers in 1920s, and then through the independence time and the current war, I would describe the whole story of those families and the whole generational traumas and problems that this colonial thing would bring to their life. So that's what the book is about.
Okay, great. Your daughter was born 3 years ago, I guess?
Yeah.
And
almost precisely, she's turning
exactly
3 in 5 days.
How he was escaping from the war with a baby on your arms?
Literally. You know, when I'm telling about that, or when I'm writing about that, it asks awful, but you know, your mind protects yourself from damage when this is happening to you. So in the middle of that situation I'm gonna tell you now about, it felt more like an adventure, you know, like probably for me too, for her for sure. Listen, on the first night when the bombing started in Kyiv, we went to the bomb shelter, we went to the person, to the other people's house with nothing, like I had one bag with mostly like stuff for my child. I took my mom, my best friend Tatiana, and my daughter, and we went to the people that lives like outside of the center, and they had a big bomb shelter, big parking that they removed all the car because no one was prepared for that. And we still do have some like bomb shelters from the Soviet times, but however, all the places were rented to be the offices or restaurants. So at the beginning of the war, there was no access there. So we had to go to some people who had their like the big building, they had the private big parking, they just removed all the cars from there and set up the bomb shelter with benches, like something on the floor to lay down and stuff like that. So we went there and it was obviously scary. We were able to hear like the explosions somewhere. And as you're like deep underground, you don't really understand, are those explosions for or right like above you? So probably, I mean, if that happens right above you, you definitely know. But it was still scary. I mean, before you have this experience, you can't be prepared for that. This is something you can't know how it's gonna be because this is so awful and so impossible. So my daughter was so happy in this bomb shelter. You know why? Because everybody brought their cats and dogs. And she have never seen before so many cats and dogs in one place. Also, cats and dogs were like a bit stressed, so they were really happy to be petted, and my daughter was starting to walk, and she would just walk like this baby walk, you know, from one dog to another, like hugging them all and grabbing them all. And the dogs and cats were very frustrated, so they would just sit still, you know, and let her do this. So that was probably one of the happiest moments of her life.
Very poetic.
Yes, that's how it was. And then, in 2 days, when they were trying to surround Kyiv and to put it under siege, Kyiv was never under siege. It was defended by Ukrainian army, so the Russian army was pulled back. However, there were Ukrainian soldiers who came to see if everything is okay in this bomb shelter, because there were like husbands and children of people staying in this bomb shelter. And then they told us that they are trying to surround Kyiv, so whoever is thinking of leaving, better leave now, or you won't probably be able to leave. So we sat in the car and we started moving towards Western Ukraine. Luckily, I was born there, and there was a period of my life when I traveled by car a lot to my hometown and back, so in order not to be bored, I would take the different roads, different paths. So all the main roads were already like heavily shelled by Russians. And there was a Russian army there, and they were shooting the civil cars and killing civil people for nothing, just, you know, not to deal with them. They would see the civil car, and instead of asking people where they are going, who they are, they would just shoot them all that, and that's it. And we took the really small village roads. I was the only person in the car able to drive. There was my mom, my one and almost 1.5 years old daughter at the back seat. Winter, -12 outside, almost no gasoline, and my best friend too. She's also my manager. So the way that normally takes you like 5-6 hours of driving took us 20 hours. I was driving for 20 hours without possibility to sleep, to rest, and also we all had to be very cheerful and nice and calm. We had to be even calm when we saw the like explosions somewhere at the horizon, or saw the like planes above us, and we didn't know there were like Ukrainian planes or Russian planes. Because there was a child in the car and nobody wanted to traumatize the child. So they were, you know, I was driving like under the this bombing planes and singing like, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. And then when we arrived to the Western Ukraine, I thought first we're gonna stop there. But I wasn't sleeping for 20 hours. My daughter was very exhausted too. And we stayed there. I slept for 3 hours, and then the air alarms went on. So I had to wake up, grab my child, put all the clothes on her, and it's a challenge. You have children, you know that it's a challenge to dress up 1.5 years old, especially when I have to do this fast, and then rush somewhere carrying her to the bomb shelter. And after 3 times of this exercise, I stated that I'm not able to do this anymore. I just won't physically survive. So we got back in the car. The brother of my manager got us some gasoline, and he spent like some hours in the queue to get that. And we went to the Polish border because my Polish publisher, and back then just the people from people who gave me the literature prize in Wrocław. Alongside that prize, I received the invitation to the literature residency for 3 months, where I was supposed to come a little bit later with my daughter, so it was all covered. I was getting money for that and getting an apartment there to come there and to write and to collaborate with them on the book. And I just contacted them and say, what if I show up a bit earlier? They told me, okay, we are waiting for you, like now, we're gonna prepare everything. But it took me like 4 more days in the queue to cross the border, in the middle of the field, in the small car with a child, with no water, -12, still windy, snowy. And it sounds awful, and it was awful and scary because a lot of people were like escape. Also, there were already people from the regions like occupied by Russia. They were also very terrified. And then a lot of people were generally moving toward the border, having nothing, just a small backpacks, or just an awful experience, but at the same time, a beautiful experience, because there was such a huge solidarity and mutual help and mutual understanding between all those people. Like how the local people from the small villages would bring us hot coffee in the morning to our cars and let me in the house to wash up my child because she was still wearing diapers. Sorry for these details, but small children, they poop in the diapers, so every time you need to wash them up, and you can't do this in the car, driving at the same time when it's like very cold there. So people would let me in their houses, and people would bring us food, and I would share what I had, like some warm clothes in the car and some gasoline as well with people who ran out of it in the queue. So it took me 4 days to cross the border. And yet this is nothing. I mean, this is true privilege to be able to drive, to have a car, and to get away from there in time. Because at the same time, when I was trying to move out from the Kiev region during very small forest passes, Russians were shooting the civil cars who were moving on the biggest roads in the direction of Western Ukraine, and killing people, killing children. So also, like, my daughter's father, he's at war, he's at the front line, he's still alive. I lost a couple of friends, however, all the members of my family are still alive. My apartment is still there. There was at some point an explosion very close, so the windows fell out, but the people who, because there are some people from the occupied territories who are living in my apartment in Kyiv currently, so they put the windows back, but my apartment is still there. But half of Ukrainians lost their property forever. They lost their children, their parents, their spouses. They lost their legs and hands and their health forever due to this bloody and injustice war started by Russia towards us, basically for nothing, just for the reason that they can't accept that we can be independent and choose the different values and different direction of living that they are choosing.
That's it. Let's talk about journalism. You have been also a columnist. Do you feel comfortable in the field of journalism?
I have a degree in journalism, and I worked in journalism for 20 years. Because in Ukraine we start university when we turn 17, which is not such a good thing, I would tell, because you can't really know what you want to do when you are 17. So mostly people are making this choice by the influence of their family, or just they are like choosing the specialty which is easier to enter. So my choice was not easy to enter. It was international journalism in the biggest state university in Kyiv. However, as I knew I was able to write, and I had already my first book published when I was 17, I thought journalism is very close to writing. Mm-hmm. First thing, it's not. You have to have really different values to become a good, real journalist and to become a writer, fiction writer. However, journalism was my thing too, and I liked it. I mostly worked for the written medias. However, I had my radio show for 4 years, daily radio show, and the last work in journalism was 2 years in Ukrainian Esquire, before they closed it at the beginning of this war, which actually began in 2014. That only was this full-scale invasion that launched in 2022. However, the war lasts already for almost 10 years. And so then the magazine was closed because it was like international franchising, and they didn't want to take care of media business, independent media business. I had a chance to understand how crucial, how important the high-level standard journalism is, because I was growing up with the growing up of internet, with the appearing and developing of social medias. Imagine I was like still calling to people by usual phone, and I was alive when there were no Facebook, Twitter, and whatsoever, and I was even already writing articles and publishing them in the medias. So era of social medias is great. It allows us more freedom. It allows us, everybody can basically turn themselves in the media. However, it makes people's opinion very easy to manipulate. It makes people vulnerable. It makes their opinion and their knowledge of the world vulnerable because it gives them opportunity to construct this or that picture of the world. So the high standard journalism is crucial nowadays to be able to understand what really is going on in the world, because the facts should be checked, and the journalism ethics makes you to tell things how they are and to show different positions and to expose the whole situation and the context, not only something from here and something from there and mixing it however you want it. So some people still are doing that. So this is the fight that would never end. But the highly professional journalism is crucial nowadays. And due to its existence, a lot of countries, a lot of people are able to be seen, to be admitted, to be helped, to be recognized, to be defended, to stand up for their rights and not to feel alone.
That's great. Your most recent book was Mom, Do You Remember? About the Russian invasion to Ukraine. How can you describe this book, and how long did you take to write it?
I started writing it in March 2022, like a month after the full-scale invasion launched. It's a story of the girl who's 15 years old, whose mom is missing in the suburbs of Kiev, occupied by Russians during the street fights. And she managed to escape with her 2-month sister, like her mother's daughter from another husband. And she goes to her father, biological father in Vienna, whom is divorced to her mother for the long time. He remembers her dad, he takes her for the vacation sometimes, but he's living abroad for ages, for 10 years. And she's heavily traumatized, obviously, but she denies it. She focused on the care of the child, on rebuilding of the relation with her father. And then that gave me the possibility to expose how different people are damaged by this war. Not only those who were damaged directly, killed, tortured, raped, shocked, being under siege, being under explosion, lost in their property, but even Ukrainians who are living abroad for a lot of years, still losing their dearest one, losing their understanding of the world. They have to face those traumatized people living in Ukraine that nobody knows how to help them. But it's a fiction book, obviously, so that's the story of a 15 years old girl who has this adventurous, trip to Vienna and lives with her rich father, whom she didn't know, but has the whole new apartment, iPad, stroller for the baby, and she also the only carer of a small baby, which is interesting for her. And then she meets another boy who is also evacuated, and they fall in love, but they are 15, so the life is never easy when you are 15. So it's like a fiction story.
But right now, for instance, in Ukraine during the war, do you think that it's easier to survive being a woman or being a man in Ukraine, where it's more difficult?
It's generally not easy to survive in Ukraine now. Whether you are a woman or a man, you can be killed basically any moment by some Iranian drone set off from territory of Russia or Belarus to kill civilian people. They target restaurants, they target hospitals, they target school, they target shopping mall. They targeted the big mail hub, the mail for civil people, basically the mail where they would have the parcels for households, food deliveries, and when you buy clothes online, that you would use this Nova Poshta thing. So they targeted their hub, killing what sort of people who were just, sorting the parcels. It had nothing to do with war or military or whatsoever. So in terms of that, be you a man, a woman, a horse, a dog, a child, it's not easy to survive in Ukraine now.
Okay. Do you think that the war in Gaza, in Israel against Hamas, has become a problem for Ukraine in terms of international support and attention?
Well, yeah, unfortunately. But I also see the direct connection between the situation in Ukraine and the start of Hamas attacking again and all the scenes that started from that. Because when Russia invaded Ukraine, me personally, and I guess everybody, would expect more actions from international community, because what they were doing was awful. And this is 21st century. It's not like that we see only number of people, children killed, women murdered, civil men tortured. We can see it literally online, because those are video from the house cameras, video registrators of these awful crimes that Russian soldiers are doing. So this was an impossible evil, and I and everybody expected more action to stop it. However, it wasn't stopped. So then the other evil things would see, aha, so you can do this, and nothing will happen. Everybody will be very concerned, but there would be no action followed. So I see this direct connection that pushed this Hamas attack to go on, because they realized, on the very exact example, that nothing gonna really happen. And yeah, obviously, we have to split the attention now with this situation in Gaza, but well, the truth is there was not only one disaster in the world going on. You know, I was in a literature festival in 2022, already after the start of the full-scale invasion, like in July. And so Richard Flanagan would say, like, people, I came from Australia, I came from your future. The climate changes are so awful that we have forest fires every year that kills like people, animals, and does the unrestorable harm to the earth, because the unique kinds of animal and fishes are disappearing forever. And I was sitting with the glass of water, and I was feeling this rage, like to stand up and to throw my glass into him and to tell him what fishes you are talking about. Russians are killing Ukrainians. But in general, if you like look at the climate changes and the harm it makes, like after 2 months from this festival, there was this awful earthquake in Syria and Turkey, which during one night, without any Russian army, took the same amount of lives as the war with Russia took by that moment from Ukrainians. So that made me to think that actually Richard Flanagan was right too. So we have to be grown up enough to acknowledge that there is not only one disaster going on in the world, and that they all demand our knowledge, our attention, and our action.
Good. What do you miss the most from Ukraine? Do you dream about Ukraine?
My people, my friends, my organized life, my dearest ones, my everything. I was always living there. There was a lot of things like wrong in Ukraine, and I have been critical to that sometimes, because Ukraine never was the best ever governed country. We were still fighting a lot of shit that we inherited from the Soviet and early post-Soviet times. However, it was a place where I was consciously choosing to live. It's not that I never had a possibility to live. I had, but it's my life. I miss it. I need it. It's my home. It's my homeland. It's very difficult to say what exactly do I mean, like all the separate, I could take a flight and see one of my friends there, the other ones there, the other ones would come from Ukraine to visit me. I can talk to my ex-husband, like to my daughter's father every day by Skype. He would tell the stories to my daughter, to our daughter. I can get Ukrainian books, I can get Ukrainian films online, I can order Ukrainian food pretty much everywhere in the world. However, I miss it all being together on its place where it belongs.
You live in London right now.
Yes.
At night, do you dream of Ukraine?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, it's really difficult for me to track what I'm dreaming at night. Yeah, I do. I remember I had a dream that me and my daughter, we are getting a dog. I used to have dogs in Ukraine. We are getting a dog, and for some reason we went to Ukraine to get this dog. And my daughter insists that it should be like a very big dog. She wants a big dog, like the huge one. And somebody offers us a dog, and the dog is huge, like a horse. And then, like, how the hell I'm transporting this creature to London, and then when everything is over, back to Ukraine. And my daughter says, like, no, this is our dog, we are taking it, like, it's not to be discussed. Something like that.
What can Colombians learn from the recent history of Ukraine?
Follow your values and do your things, whatever happening around. First thing, and second, for the really good result, you have to fight. You have to be ready to give everything, even your life. Unfortunately, the changes to good never come easy and never come painless.
La inmediatez, veracidad y confiabilidad de la información son vitales en la era digital. Por eso, suscríbete a nuestro canal de YouTube y entérate de las últimas noticias, especiales, entrevistas, documentales y mucho más contenido. Somos El Tiempo. Suscríbete ahora.